Hi everyone. This video is to demonstrate how to use CurrPort to monitor and mitigate and manage the connection to the host. And the second video will focus on using Process Hacker. And this particular video is going to focus on CurrPort. We look at the week number 4 for the CurrPort processor process and Process Hacker to monitor and mitigate the attack. So these are 3 files: the hands-on associated files, CurrPorts x64, and there's also the Process Hacker 2.39 setup file. And this is the vulnerability assessment tool, or the attacking tool from developed by OWASP years ago. We are going to speed up the exercise. So I already installed those 3 files into Mount virtual machine, Windows 2012. So we will not install that again. If you want to install it again to Windows 2019, Windows 2016, or Windows 10, feel free to do so and perform your own exercise. Okay, so we're going to first have to log in using Horizon Client to connect it to the Mount VM, where we're going to power on Windows 2012 and Windows 2016. And we have to also power on the internet firewall here. So this Windows 2016, first, by default, we have, it has 2 NIC cards, but one of the NIC cards has been disabled. So we have to enable it first. The document that we're going to use, let me show you the document of that. This is the document, the handout for the CurrPort. So you're going to download this one and open it up, or just open it from the canvas, which will show you this particular document, CurrPort Process Hacker. Now the lab objective is to, of course, as we mentioned, monitor, investigate, and manage your TCP/IP connection. And we are going to use deploy those 2 utilities to achieve our goals. And this is a CurrPorts quoted from their website, what it's been used for. It itself warrants a lot of more time and effort to be put in to monitor your host and see what's going on with your host. See if you have any background connection that we didn't even pay attention to. So we are going to see a few of that today. Process Hacker is the same way, and there's some link you can go to their website, and each one of them is very, very powerful and require you to spend some time to get more familiar with. And we will use the FTP, HTTP as the denial of service attack, and other exercises to illustrate the concept of this particular objective we try to achieve. And in the Mount machine, I documented here, this is what you need to turn it on: 2012 R2, 16, and the firewall. And those already been downloaded and installed to the Windows 2012. I don't think I installed it to 2016. If you want to do that, please feel free to do so. And since we are not able to access the 2135 Mount classroom, we're going to skip this part. Okay, the lab procedure, we are going to go through the basics. In your window box, we will have some basic commands such as network statistics, A, B, and O. So if you do that, you will see that A is listing all of them, and B is to run to show what's the what is the file name, the exe file executable that's associated with each connection, and N is to listed with the numbers and so on and so forth. There are a lot of parameters. So I'm going to put this on the side and started to do the demonstration. So first thing first, we go into the 2016 and we're going to send a control alternate delete into it. And password is change me. Now we have to set up the IP address correctly. So we're going to take a look at that. We can reduce it. We are going to configure FTP server here later. For now, we'll just leave it alone. So you're going to highlight this network box, right click, and then open the network sharing center. There are so many different ways to achieve this. So feel free to use the procedure that you are familiar with. We're not going to do a VPN. That's for different exercise. So leave that alone. We are going to enable our inside. So before we enable it, let's go ahead and look at property. And we're going to only focus on the IPv4. So take out IPv4 and then say property. Well, it's actually 10.01.1. That's okay, perfectly fine. But 10.01.3, DNS service not up. So we're going to change that to Google. So leave everything unchanged except that we put Google up as the DNS server. And we say okay. And then next step is to enable it. As far as outside, let's take a look at it. Right click and look at the property and cell. We're looking at TCP/IP 4, version 4 to see that. The IP address is 16, 2016. IP outside is 10.10.10.16. Default gateway is 10.10.10.10. 10.10.10.10 is the interface of this firewall, and this interface firewall outside will connect you to the internet. So this one looks fine. We don't have to save that one. So we are ready to perform the exercise. So let's exit it out of here. And I always like to do a simple quick test after configuring it. So right click, highlight the window, square window here, right click, and we can go to a command prompt. Either way is fine. And let's check it out. Ping, just ping Google's DNS server. Well, it works fine. So that means, hey, we have internet access. And we're going to ping the internal host box 10.0.1.12. So, okay, good. Our attacker here and our host that we loaded CurrPort and process hacker, they can communicate. So that's always the first step to do any exercise. We will have a very similar exercise, but going through a firewall. But to start up with a simple connection, I'll just use the internal, the same network. And 70% of the attack comes from inside anyways. So let's just start from the simple internal attack and vulnerability mitigations exercise first. Right, so the basics is from go to Windows 2016, which we are currently at. Right click and let's go to the command prompt again. Stay here, and you're going to do a net stat dash, just like the handout mentioned. We can do A, B, and O, and you will see that it's all the connections, including listening port, established port, and all that stuff. So if you think that's a little bit too overwhelmed, we can try I don't want to have all of them listed. Let me just try N. You can see, you only show me the established ports. And I don't know why. I never pay attention. Say, hey, how come my system is connected to port 443 of this server? So that, you know, that's something that you might want to spend some time to investigate, and which we will. And of course, you can also, A with a B in there, so you can see, hey, it's from which application that is communicating with the 52.242.211.89. Well, the exe file that initiated the command is the Explorer. That's kind of interesting that we need to take a look into that. So that is the first part for the basics that on the handout, ABNO, and you can also do a question mark in here and do a question mark, and you see, oh, there are so many parameters. So feel free to experiment that. Right, so we're going to move on from that, and the document shows you what does the statements establish, what does it mean by established. If you see closed, what does it mean by closed, and so on and so forth. And you can try the dash question mark, and you can try this, AN or BN. A more advanced approach is using the CurrPorts to take a look at what's connected to your system. So we are going to do the first lab. We are going to actually take a look at the CurrPorts, and then we're going to do some filtering so that it make it more viewable. So I'm going to move that on the side, and you're going to take a look at Windows 2016 here, and let's take a look at the CurrPort. I downloaded to the download folder, so you're going to double click on this one and double click on that, and we can say, hey, extract it out, and extract it to the download folder is fine. Now we're going to run the program. Right now you can see that this CurrPort is running, and it's filled up with a lot of information, just like your NetStat space dash ABNO, all that stuff. Then we're going to filter out. If you're listening, let's filter this one out first, and then see what's been connected. So right-clicked, and this is, by the way, documented in the handout. And you right-clicked it, and you're going to say, hey, I want to exclude it. I don't want to see that. I don't want to see the remote ports because it's in a listening mode. So once you click that, you can see, oh, okay, it's already been excluded out. And the action that we did in the graphical user interface, it actually interpreted to the funnel here. And you can see that it says exclude the remote, no matter it's TCP or UDP. If it's not connected, then let's filter it out. Let's don't look at it. So this will actually, see, this is the one including everything. And then if you follow the instruction and say exclude the remote port, then you're going to see something. This is a filter, and you're going to see something that's more specific. And we are going to put in including just the Chrome. So we are going to move this on the side. And at this point, let's go open the Chrome. And once we open it up, and let's see, you will see, oh, Chrome shows up now here. And if you just want to see Chrome, you can actually come here, or just highlight here, right-click, and say, hey, I wanted to include this one on only the process of the Chrome. Then you are going to just see the Chrome. We are not going to filter it out. This is like the good size of the screen for us to demonstrate our exercise. So this is the step. When you have time, you want to try it out, feel free to do that. And if it ever kind of like gobble up, and you feel that, hey, how come it's not working? That's because this filter got hidden in behind. It can show even if you clear it, delete it, it doesn't actually come out. So you can click this one to delete it all. Okay. All right. And you, of course, have other documents. You can actually play with other filter settings and all that stuff. One of the command that we're going to play is to close a processor by right-click the item and choose the option of kill the process or close. We have two choices in here. If you right-clicked, and then so you can kill it or you can close it. Okay, we're not going to do it here. We're going to do it to the FTP exercise. Okay, and in the process hacker, we're going to close this Explorer, and then find out how we can regenerate all that stuff back. So on the second exercise here on lab 2, what we're going to do is we're going to make the 2016 an FTP server, and we'll have the FTP server have the Windows 2012 as an FTP client to access the server, and then you do a DIR to take a look at it and see what's going on with it. And the only filter we're going to use is this one. So I think it's already in there. If it's not, then we'll create that. I believe it's already been done so. So let's click here, and yeah, it is. So it filters all the listening ports. Okay. Now let's close the Google Chrome, because Google Chrome is pretty chatty. You can see that in the background. There's a lot of them like that. Okay, and later on it's going to disappear on that. So it's like this time wait. It's waiting to be closed down. Now, I already documented those steps, so I'm going to just go ahead and demonstrate it through. First, we have to enable the 2016 as the FTP server. So now in here, we're going to go to our server manager, which is here, or you can click here. And then this is the server manager. And this is the one that we just reduced when it boots up. So we're going back here, and you take a look at the tool, and there's an IIS already been installed, pre-installed for you. And we're going to look at sites. We're going to create an FTP site. So you're going to open this one, and you look at the sites here. Just some quick overview. If you use the File Explorer, and you take a look at the C drive structure, and you see that there is a folder called INET-POP, Internet Public. Double click, you will see quite a few folders here, and your default web page will be somewhere in here, www.root. And if you create an FTP site, and this is the default one, okay? So in this exercise, we want to put something in here. So let's just go to the download folder, and then let's just select all this in the download, copy, and then let's go back to the FTP root, and let's paste it in. So we have something in the FTP root. Now we're going to create a site and using the FTP root as our FTP site. We're going to add a site, and it's documented on the handout. On the server site name, you can say my FTP. It's okay, you can call it anything you want. Physical path, that is the one that we just copy file to. So you're going to click these 3 dots here to browse it, and it's on the C drive, and it's in INET-POP as I showed you before. And you're going to select FTP root here. You say, okay, so it's C:\\, INET-POP / FTP root. Sounds good. So let's click next. Now in here, let's use all unassigned. And then we are not going to use the SSL. We are going to make it simple and quick. So we say, hey, no SSL, because otherwise we have to create an SSL server. And then either the client will join the domain to accept the SSL server, or we have to get a public SSL server for it to work. So we're going to just quickly deploy the FTP. Now we click next, and I'm going to show you some of the quick vulnerabilities in my associated with those clear text FTP telnet type of applications. So just do both anonymous and basics, and allow the user. We can say all users. If you want it to be safe, you probably don't want to have a user use the basic, because then you have more chance of leaking out your credentials. And usually you will just let them read it. We don't mind in the exercise, we just let them do the read write. So you will do the anonymous, and you're going to allow other basic users and any user, as long as you define in your window box, you allow them to do it, and that's it, finished. So our FTP site is up already. Okay, so now when it's done, let's open it up and still look at our CurrPort and see all the other has been closed. So what we will do is we'll go into the 2012 R2 to remotely sign on. So we are going to right click and then generate a control alternate delete. And the password, of course, is change me. All right, and I just ran an attack beforehand. I'm going to just close it out. Now, in my document, I ask you to run Wireshark, and you can capture start first. So we are capturing before we FTP it out. Now we are going to also, meanwhile, go to the command prompt, and then you're going to do FTP to 10.0.1.1, and then ask you the name of the user, administrator, and the password is change me. All right, and then so if you do a dir in here, you can see whatever we copy to the FTP root, now it's available for me. So let's go back to the Windows 2016, and you can see that. All right, now you have shown that you have a 10.01.12, and it's FTP in to here, because it's FTP port 21. When you do a data request, port 20 will be open. So before we go any further, let's go back to 2012 in the Wireshark. Let's stop it, stop the capture, and then we'll do a filter, say FTP, and hit enter. So then you filter out everything except the FTP traffic. Highlight any packet, and you say, hey, I want to follow the string. Click that, and you can see how easy that is for you to see the username and administrator. Even though if it may seem very vulnerable, but if you're on the internet, unless you are really on the upstream routers, it's hard for you to catch that. However, if you want to do this kind of quick deployment for file transfer, then we will have better off using another method of authentication before you let them FTP it in. And that comes to the next topic that we are going to discuss and have the hands-on, is to use the Radius server to do the authentication before you do those kind of clear text connection. Okay. So let's exit it out, and we are not going to run the Wireshark again. Oops, let's quit without saving. Now, we can also go to the Windows 2016 here and take a look at next step. So you can see that, oh, all right, I do have something that's established, and it's the FTP services in here. And of course, I still have those two that I need to figure out what's going on with the connection here. So at least you will see that the port 21 is here. Port 21 is the FTP connection. Port 20 is the data. So if we go back to Windows 2012, and then you do another DIR, it's already timeout. So let's do it again. Quit, and then we do FTP up arrow key. Go in there, and you will do anonymous this time. Let's see. If I can spell it, anonymous. Good. And then if I do DIR, at least there's no password with any users. Anonymous, anyone can go in here if you want to have some files available for anyone to download and that you don't mind. And then we go to 2016 here, and we do an up arrow key to see it. Now this time you can see that, hey, not only 21 is there, but also your port 20. That's actually the data channel when you do a DIR. Right, so we are not going to look at those command prompt anymore. So let's exit it out, and you will see that, hey, I have both port 21 and port 20 in here. And if you wanted to disconnect it, you just go ahead and highlight this one, right click, and you say, hey, I want to close the selected TCP, or you can kill it, okay? Kill the port or close the connection. So if you killed it, and it's gone, okay? Now, if you go back in here, and you do another DIR, your connection is already been closed, okay? Remote host calls you, so you no longer can attached to it. So that is the part of this exercise 2. Asks you to use a Wireshark to see the clear text, the CurrPorts, and then we can actually close the connection. Now we are going to do the lab number 3 to stop an application layer DOS attack. So we don't need to do more filter. Your screen will be filled with a lot of stuff. Just be aware that you're going to click the GUI, which is the 38K applications, and just don't click the GUI.exe in the Windows 2012. And this is the screenshot of the tool that we are going to use to evaluate, to actually demonstrate how do we clear the attacker. And here is the HTTP, of course, is the 10.0.1.1, and we are going to maximize it to no more than 10,000 and 4,000 concurrent. And this is the timeout, and that's it. We're going to run the attack. And in your CurrPorts, you will see it quickly filled with a lot of stuff, and you can highlight it to clear it, okay? So this is the part that will end our exercise with the CurrPort, and we'll move on to the continue on with the processor hacker in another video. So in the Windows 2012, what we will do is it's actually in the C drive. This HTTP DOS tool. It's been documented on the handout too. Double click, and you can see this GUI, which is a 38K application. Don't click on this text document, it wouldn't work. So you double click that, make sure that you do this. And by the way, I have to mention that the tool is not very new. It is there for the for vulnerability assessment purpose. You will not use it even though this is not the latest, strongest DOS tool. By no means you should use it in any boxes that you don't own. So no matter what kind of tool you're using, no matter what kind of scan you're going to do, anything you want to do it in the lab. Do it in the MonSec lab inside, not even the MonSec host, okay? Do it on the boxes that you own. Okay? It's very important. It might have very, very serious consequences if you don't follow that. So we're going to attack 10.0.1.1. And here we're going to say, hey, 10,000. And we're going to make it 4,000. So it kind of making it a little bit bigger. So we say run attack. So you can see that, okay, quickly you got a lot of connections. And let's see how it goes in here. So you can see, well, it's really filled with a lot of things. So we can do this. We'll take a look at this one. And we can drag it and hold the shift key and then click and right click, say, hey, close the connection and say yes. And then still, it's a lot of them. So we can select the last one and drag it to the very beginning, hold the shift key. And let's go ahead, right click and close the connection again. Sure. All right, finally, I think the maximum connection reached, it's gone. We only have a few here. So, of course, when you do the DOS command, that's -bn, you're going to see a bunch of them too. So if we take a look at that, I think we already closed it. Don't need to actually double confirm that. This is much easier for you to see the whole thing and then filter it out. Okay, so the final note will be find out what's the HTTPS that's with the explorers. So you can highlight that, and we don't want to close it yet. We just take a look at the property of that. Then you can see, hey, some detail of this whole process, the property of this connection. Now you can actually right click and look at the property and highlight this IP. And right click and say, hey, we're going to copy it. And you can go to Google Chrome. And in here, you can say, hey, who is this guy? So you can see it's Microsoft Azure server. So this is one of the process that in the background that you want to run your backup or those processes that when you configure your window box, we continuously want to do an update to the background process. Okay, so that concludes our first part of the CurrPort video demonstration. I'll create another video to demonstrate the similar topic using Process Hacker.